Okay, Hospitality and Politics, Andrew Ridgie here, and I am very excited for this episode. It is the dynamic duo of liquor licensing and regulation in the New York City restaurant and nightlife industry. They are partners in the law firm Pisetsky and Bookman. They are founding trustees and counsel to the New York City Hospitality Alliance. They are friends, and they are very smart when it comes to all of these issues related to liquor licensing, outdoor dining, and the things that I'm constantly emailing, texting, and calling them about saying, can you do this? Can you not do that? It is Rob and Max Bookman. How you guys doing?
Thank you. Great to be here.
This is great.
Yeah.
So actually, before, what do you think?
It's very cool, actually.
I'm just upset that it's taken you this long to get us on the pod.
I
mean, you had Tom Colicchio before us. You had Rosanna Scotto before us. I mean, I was just
right here.
waiting for the call. Yeah. So, I'm glad to finally be here.
Perfect. So much stuff to.
Are we billing this, Max?
You bill it, and then we'll bill it back. There's so much stuff I want to go over, talking about liquor licensing, community boards, outdoor dining. But I thought just to kind of set it all up, just start from the beginning when we're talking about Prohibition, no alcohol, obviously New York City and speakeasies and places like the 21 Club and this whole history that people just kind of point to, and they're like, oh yeah, Prohibition. It was this time in our history. And now you walk down the street and there's restaurants and bars all over the place. And people are still dealing with all different types of complicated liquor laws. But not only where did all this regulation come from, but where did it come from?
Yeah.
I guess is my question.
Well, you're fortunate because Max happens to really be an alcohol historian.
As well as a drinker. I mean, people talk about Prohibition, but I mean, alcohol is as old as human society. It predates civilization. Humans were making alcohol and drinking it before human civilization even took root. And if you go back all the way to the earliest civilizations, Hammurabi's Code in Mesopotamia has detailed regulations on how to brew beer, conditions upon which it could be sold, regulating tavern keepers. Egypt had similar regulations for beer, which was a staple product for theirs. You fast forward to the colonial era in the United States, and alcohol was regulated locally across the U.S. Then it was the colonies with rules concerning how far you could be from churches, with rules that said that if you served alcohol, you had to have beds for people to sleep in. And so the idea of alcohol regulation is actually old as civilization, and that pulls through all the way through today. It comes with the recognition that alcohol is different. It is a different product. There's a lot of good to it. It's core to celebrations. It's fun. It's something that people do, but it also comes with challenges, and we have to be, as a society, be thoughtful about under what conditions people drink alcohol. Prohibition was a major policy failure. Emerged from the end of World War II, came through the temperance movement, a very specific movement to that period of time, which thought, focused on how, the solution to all of society's problems would be to prohibit people from drinking. And it didn't work. A lot of the regulations we have today in New York were enacted after Prohibition. And for the most part, they work just fine. Alcohol regulation in New York, and every other state has alcohol laws, does what it's supposed to do. But there are certain aspects of the law that are beginning to show its age. And we, as you know, the work we do with the Alliance is to try to point those outdated aspects of the laws out and try to reform them so that they can meet the moment of modern times.
What's the framework? So is the 3-tier system, or why do we have the system that we have today?
Yeah. So you mentioned the 3-tier system. So this is something that emerged after Prohibition. The 3-tier system is very simple. It takes the alcoholic beverage supply chain and it divides it into 3 different segments. Manufacturers who make the alcohol, those are your brewers and your distillers and your wineries. Distributors, these are the middlemen who take the alcohol from the manufacturers and bring them to the retailers. And then the 3rd tier is the retailers. And retailers is broken down into 2 sister categories, on-prem retailers and off-prem retailers. On-prem is our members, restaurants, bars, hotels, places where you can get a drink on site. Off-prem is grocery stores, supermarkets, liquor stores. And the whole design of that system is to prohibit what we call vertical integration. The idea is to keep alcoholic beverage ownership fair, a fair playing field, so that if you own a bar, you have the same access to products at the same price as the bar next to you. The bar next to you can't enter into a special deal with an alcoholic beverage manufacturer to get themselves product at a better price. And it originated from this idea that emerged after Prohibition, which was that, which we saw actually before Prohibition, which is that in the years before Prohibition, you did see a major consolidation of the alcoholic beverage industry where big breweries were basically buying up local bars. And every bar was owned by a different brewery. And that was seen as anti-competitive. It promoted a lot of short selling drinks for very, very low prices just to get feet in the door. And it was recognized across the U.S. as a problem. And that's what our system is designed to prevent.
And this is all the very opposite of Europe and England especially. So the three-tier laws are also sometimes known as the anti-tied house laws.
Okay.
Because in England especially, they have what's called tied houses, where a brewer owns the bars and they're tied together. And the idea here was to do the opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you really want competition in the marketplace.
Correct.
And everything's not vertically integrated where one company is basically producing, distributing, selling.
That's right. And that's why we don't have, if you look around the city, you don't have, an Anheuser-Busch bar. They would love to have that, but they don't have that because they're not allowed to own bars.
Yeah. And as Max said, every state has some version of the three-tier law and anti-tied house laws. New York is particularly strict in their interpretation, and sometimes it goes too far.
Yeah.
When we talk about, later in the conversation about reforms, one of the problems we see now that the world is very different than it was when Prohibition ended, and there's investments in businesses here from other parts around the country. We have people who want to invest in a restaurant group here, let's say, and they also are located in Europe and they have invested in a brewery, or they've invested in a winery, and they can't be an investor in a business here because of of these laws, and those are reforms that we've talked about changing. When Cuomo was governor, he had proposed it, but then he got into some issues in Albany, and that part of the agenda didn't go forward. But those are kind of things that we could talk about, that reforms that still need to be made.
Yeah. So you've been doing liquor licensing for decades now. What have you seen that's changed over your time when it comes to like restaurants and bars trying to obtain a liquor license? Have there been any huge changes, or are things generally the same?
Well, there's been a lot of changes. The law is how many years old now?
93.
And it had very distinct categories. Mm-hmm. You had a restaurant category, you had a bar category, you had a catering category, you had a hotel category. We in the modern world and in our practice are dealing with, all these types of newer businesses that don't fit into one of those categories. And how do we squeeze these square pegs into round holes? So the legislature has reacted to some of those things over the years. Movie theaters, and have liberalized from no alcohol to alcohol in the waiting areas, in the lobby areas, to now alcohol, inside as well.
Yes, you can sit back on one of the recliners and have a drink and watch a movie.
Right. Just to pick up on that, so from 1933, when Prohibition ended, to 1964, if you wanted to open a bar, you had to have enough food to qualify yourself as a restaurant, which was very hard to do, and most were not doing it. And so in the 60s, they created a new license category called tavern, which recognized that, we have bars, and bars, don't serve the same amount of food as restaurants. And there have been, over the years, to Rob's point, additional license categories that have been added to recognize that as our society has matured, there are places where people want to consume alcohol that maybe didn't exist or wasn't even in the thought process in the 1930s. But it, in our opinion, there needs to be more. What we see commonly these days is, a lot of brick and mortar stores that are trying to find new ways to be relevant, new ways to meet what the consumers demand. In retail, like watch retail, clothing stores, barbershops.
Yeah.
We see this also in offices, back to office policies. A lot of places like this where alcohol is being thought of as part of the equation when it really wasn't being considered that way in the 1930s. And a lot of what we do in our practice is try to find ways within the existing framework to make that happen.
And sometimes the answer is, the liquor authority tries to interpret the law reasonably or liberally, if you will. And sometimes it's a step too far, and the answer is, get the law changed. One thing that comes up all the time is many new buildings that go up now, they want to add amenities to those buildings, whether it's a high-end residential building or just a new office building. And one of those amenities is they want to add a bar or a lounge that serves alcohol, but just for the people in that building or their guests. Well, there's no category for that. Unless you want to be a non-for-profit, which they don't. So there are issues there. There are areas there that need to be addressed, sometimes with legislative change. And the non-for-profit category in and of itself is the only category where you're not open to the public. Yet there are many situations like this where nobody would care if you're not open to the public, but you're not going to pretend to be a non-for-profit. So there are changes that have been made, some by interpretation, some by statutory change, and there are more. Doesn't mean that every place that some business owner wants to have alcohol is appropriate. I remember when the shared office spaces first came to us and said, we want to have alcohol. And they were shocked to learn when I said there's no category for office booze. It's not a category. There is no license for you.
When you watch Mad Men or any of these old shows, everything, the work revolved around the bar.
Right. Well, and you still in your own office, can have a bottle, but these were a new business where they were in the business of renting space to people, and they wanted their tenants as part of the amenity for the tenants to be able to go to a common area and and pour themselves a drink from the kitchen, and there was no category for it. And still is not, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems, whether we talk about liquor law or we've done the zoning, which we could talk about zoning and allowing dancing in New York City, is a lot of these laws are old and they just never contemplated how society was going to be decades later. And then you have innovative business people who come in, they have this great idea, they want to invest money, and then they come to you and they find out, actually, no, sorry.
Well, look, that's
who would have thought I'll use WeWork as a name because it's almost generic talking about shared office space. But who would have thought that there was a business in people renting small amounts of office space from somebody who's renting in a building themselves? And it's very creative.
No, I was just going to say, that's why I said it at the top as well. The fundamentals of alcohol regulation are sound. Alcohol needs to be regulated. It needs to be regulated because of the effects that it could have if it's done, if it's served in a proper way. Minors, exactly. So the basic, basic blocking and tackling of alcohol regulation is important. But as I say, there are aspects of the law that are outdated, and one thing that we do, Andrew, with the Alliance is we constantly are talking to whoever will listen to talk about ways to improve it, make it easier to get a liquor license, loosen up some of these license categories to recognize new modern business practices, and then within putting legislation aside within the liquor authority itself, advocating for them to read the existing law in ways that allows for some of these more imaginative licenses.
And together, we've had many victories in the last few years.
Let's talk about that. So what have been some of the changes? Because we were talking about, yes, there's been a lot of changes. Some of them are minor, but other are major, and they have a real impact on people that are trying to open restaurants or bars. What do you think are some of the biggest changes?
Huge victory that the three of us were a part of during COVID was the expansion of temporary permits. That's something that was not part of the original post-prohibition liquor law. Temporary permits allow a business to operate and sell alcohol while its liquor license application was pending. Something that the people who drafted the liquor law after Prohibition wouldn't have even conceived of. How could you let someone serve while your application is pending? They also thought it would take 30 days to get a liquor license back then. But with the major backlog of license applications, we were able to get legislation passed that really expanded the ability in a really fair and democratic way for businesses in New York City to be able to operate and sell liquor while their application is pending. That has been hugely helpful, and that's a major change.
So for
drinks to go. No one ever thought that we would be able able to have the ability with a food order for a restaurant to also deliver or allow somebody to leave with a sealed drink.
Yeah.
That was a change, in the law that we secured.
Yeah. And that was, kind of pandemic related. Everybody saw how popular it was, and people started saying, well, why can't I, get a bourbon with my burger and get it delivered to my home?
That's
alcohol, outdoor dining in non-contiguous space.
Yes.
What we mean by that, historically, the liquor license is your indoor space and outdoor space that is physically connected to your indoor space. When the pandemic came and we were able to secure, roadway dining for the first time, there was no mechanism under the liquor law to allow there to be alcohol consumption or service there because you had a public sidewalk in between.
Yeah.
It wasn't contiguous. So we together, Max is a great drafter. He drafted the legislation and, we got it passed to allow, for that, both temporarily and now permanently.
Yeah. And then having to get the changes with the thoroughfare of the bikes going through. I mean, some of this stuff I find so fascinating because when you speak with just everyday people, they think about whatever the policy is just as obvious. Oh yeah, of course you should be able to, serve alcohol in your roadway cafe because that's the purpose. You want to have a bowl of pasta and a glass of wine, but they don't always understand the complexity and the politics of the policy to actually get these things done.
Totally. It's easy to have a good idea, but then when you actually sit down and try to play out that idea and to make it a reality, make it a law, that's where all these nuances wind up coming in. And, we live in a big, complicated society. We live in a big, large, tightly packed city. There's a lot of different competing interests, and anything that you do is going to impact somebody else.
Sure.
And so we,
we could talk about, some of the reforms that are necessary, like the 500-foot law, 200-foot law, what they are. But we have, when we talk about that, we have to recognize that in addition to all of this, there is a steady group, of people who don't like alcohol reforms. They may go out to restaurants, they like their restaurant, but not that restaurant or not that bar. And so many of these common sense changes, there is a, lobbying, effort often, with a couple of elected officials. It's mostly Manhattan centric that fight it. And we fight back in return.
Absolutely. So before we get to I want to talk about the 500-foot law and the 200-foot law because those are things that always come up. Yeah. But on the temporary liquor permits, like you said, I think initially with the drafters never imagined that it would take, 8 months to get 9, a 10, liquor 11, license, 12, 10 months, 12, a year to get a liquor license. And I know the state liquor authority has been working, trying to reduce that backlog, but it became necessary to get a temporary permit while your actual official license is pending.
That's right.
How long was it taking before we were able to get the temporary liquor permit law passed to get a liquor license to open up a new restaurant or bar?
I mean, at the depth of the liquor authority's most recent backlog, and I say most recent backlog because if you look from a historical perspective, there have been times over the decades where the liquor authority has gotten backlogged. Just quick aside, the liquor authority is the third largest revenue generating agency in New York State, only after the tax department, which collects all your income taxes for the state, and the Department of Motor Vehicles. After that's the liquor authority. Wow. They generate a significant amount of revenue through licensing fees to the state, but they don't get nearly anything close, amounting that back in return. They rank very low in terms of the amount of resources they're given as an agency. So it's a chronically underfunded agency, a real human resources problem. The people who are there are really, really good public servants. They do their absolute best, but they're really dealt a poor hand. And we always, try to do what we can to push for a better hand.
I started practicing before there in 1990. Their head count was about half of what it was then.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that's why you have a backlog. But in any event, in the most recent backlog, at the pits of it, it was taking 13 plus months to get a liquor license, a regular liquor license, not one where there's any controversy or complexity, just a regular vanilla liquor license application, 13 months. So that really did elevate our calls for temporary permits because it was a completely untenable situation. How could a business owner possibly make that work, have to wait over a year before they could start serving alcohol? So that really helped us underscore the importance of getting temporary permits. Fortunately, now the backlog is still coming down. It's not where they want it to be. The original liquor law has language in there that contemplates about 30 days to get a liquor license. It's never going to be there, but
most of the early years when I was practicing, it was 3 months.
Yeah. Okay. And what's it taking right now about?
Anyway, right now, around, I don't know what their official word is, but our observations in our office are around 8 to 9 months, which is still too long.
Okay.
Way too long.
All right. 200-foot law, because that's like I don't want to say easier, but I think it's the less complex. It's more straightforward. What is the 200-foot law?
Well, Max did the 200. I'll do a little history to 500.
Okay, that's
I was there when it happened.
Yeah, we'll split up 200 and 500 foot. And just to start it with, these two laws have sort of similar sounding names, right? 200-foot law, 500-foot law. They've got nothing to do with each other. They're completely unrelated. And so 200-foot law was part of the original liquor law in 1933. There was a version of it in New York State in our liquor laws before Prohibition. There was versions of it in the colonial times. It has very old roots. The idea behind it is we can't mix alcohol with religious observance and with education of children. It comes from some very deep-seated, essentially puritanical ideas about alcohol. A lot of the temperance movement that led to Prohibition emerged from churches. There were old laws that said that the taverns had to be closed on Sunday to get people into church. So this idea of alcohol being at odds with church folk is sort of deeply entrenched in our laws today. But what the 200-foot law says today in 2025 is you can't have a full liquor license, that means beer, wine, and hard liquor, if you are within 200 feet of a place of worship or a school. Now, there's more nuance to it. There's a lot of details to it, but that's the basic principle. Beer and wine license is okay.
That was the nuance I was going to pick out.
Which, of course, is ridiculous. So you could have a wine bar or a beer garden, which is our classic example.
A beer
that's
garden
right
where
next
nobody, overconsumes.
right next to a church, right next to a school, and that's not prohibited by law. But you can't have a Michelin star restaurant, which, of course, needs to have a cocktail menu, also within 200 feet. And it's really harmful, the law. Not only is it completely outdated, and today, I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, especially because, by the way, not every business that sells alcohol is even open at the same time that a church, place of worship, or school is in place. I've got school-age kids. I don't care if there's a restaurant or a bar near my kid's school. So it not only is it just completely outdated, but it's really harmful to businesses, especially in certain neighborhoods that have lots of churches. The churches that we speak to, by and large, don't like the 200-foot law. They don't like sort of being blamed for for a bar not being able to get a liquor license,
or a restaurant. And their parishioners probably want to go after church. I've actually heard that from a lot of people.
But we have these stretches in church-heavy neighborhoods, in Harlem and Park Slope, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, other neighborhoods where you got churches on every block, where these commercial corridors can't develop really nice, good restaurant components because no one can get a full liquor license.
And it just adds to, fast food instead, which is not healthy. And it creates a fine dining desert in some areas.
Well, just quickly, just to add to that, I mean, it's it really, because not everybody understands this law, we have situations where people, find out about it after they've made commitments to a space. So not only does it hurt the neighborhoods, but it also hurts businesses who are sort of caught off guard and unaware that this law exists.
Well, that's, I think, one of the biggest.
They don't know how it's measured, where, they're a corner place on an avenue and the church is around the corner on the side street and they don't have proper counsel and they're saying, oh, it doesn't, we're not on the same block. But if you're on the corner, they deem you on the same block, even though your door is not on the side street.
Well, I think that's one of the big problems with laws like this. You have a new small business owner. They want to invest everything into a great new restaurant. They have a great concept, and then they just don't know. They have no idea that there is something like the 200-foot law, and they sign a lease, and they're 190 feet away from a church or a synagogue or a school, and they find out that they can't get a full liquor license, and their whole business model is upended.
Well, let me just say one more thing about that before we pivot to the 500-foot law. And Rob was talking about this with the lobby that is entrenched in favor of keeping liquor laws the way that they are. That lobby, the people who don't want to see the liquor laws reformed, do not want to see the 200-foot law reformed, because the anti-nightlife, anti-bar and restaurant community out there that does not want to see more liquor licenses likes the idea that there are these little 200-foot radii all around the city where no one can get a full liquor license. So even though this law basically provides nothing good today in 2025 and really shouldn't exist in a modern New York state that's trying to be pro-business is not only there, but has people who want to see it stay there, which is really unfortunate.
Well, we've had people I know that call us and have said, hey, I have the support of the school, or I have support of the synagogue, the church, or the mosque, and
is it relevant?
Can I get, is there any way, last thing on that, is there any way around the 200-foot law, or is it just no full liquor license?
I mean, there's a lot of nooks and crannies to the 200-foot law, which we don't have time to get into. So when I say within 200 feet of a place of worship or a school, there's a lot of nuance to that. So what we typically do with the client is we dig into that nuance. Where exactly is the door located? Because you measure door to door.
What floor are you on?
Yeah. Some of these churches have multiple doors. Only ingress doors for parishioners count. So sometimes we can make some hay there.
Sometimes it's a school or church is in a building that is multiple uses, and that might disqualify the building from counting. So there are, but at the end of the day, if it's a real church and it meets all the qualifications and the measurement is done such that you're 199 feet, you're out of luck.
Unless you're well-heeled and connected, because one of the most absurd things about the 200-foot law is that since 1933, when it was enacted, there have been about 50 to 75 scenarios where someone has been able to lobby Albany to carve out a specific property from the 200-foot law. So if you crack open the law book and you look at the 200-foot law, what you'll see it'll say, Section 1, no church, no full liquor license within 200 feet of a church or school. And then it'll have sections 2 through 50, except in, 300 Broadway in, whatever New York, whatever. And it go on and on and on like that, which just contributes to the whole, inequity and unfairness of it. If we really think this is good policy, which it's not, why do we have all these carve-outs for people who are connected?
So you have the money and the ability and the connections to get your own legislation passed. There's a chance you may be able to.
And it's happened over the years.
So none of it so much of it doesn't make sense. And I know there is a bill in Albany we've been advocating for at the Hospitality Alliance, is just to get rid of this old law. I mean, I always say be one thing if it was like there was no alcohol allowed within 200 feet, but the fact that you can have a beer or wine license but not a full liquor license to sell spirits makes no sense at all.
No sense.
It should be abolished.
All right, so 500-foot law.
And speaking of things that should be abolished, and you were on a commission that was appointed with governor and appointees from both houses of the legislature, which made recommendations, and two of their recommendations were to abolish the 200-foot law and abolish the 500-foot law.
I believe they were both unanimous.
I believe and they may have been the only ones that were unanimous. Had all different stakeholders. 500-foot law, what's that about? Other than it has also, Max said, a number in it, and it's a foot law. It's completely different. So in the early 1990s, believe it or not, on Bell Boulevard in Queens, a series of biker bars opened. And if you know the neighborhood, it's not apartment buildings, it's residential single-family homes on the side streets, all coming right up to Bell Boulevard. So the backyards of these commercial strip is the backyards of residential homes. And it was quite disturbing to a number of the residential neighborhoods. So they went to their local state senator, by a man named Senator Padovan, and said, you got to do something about all these liquor licenses and all these bars that are opening. He went to the state liquor authority and said, you got to deny some of these applications, no more. And they said, we can't. There is no provision for us to do what you want us to do. We don't look to the left, the business to the left and the business to the right. We don't look to the business across the street. We look at the application that's before us, the four corners of that application. Is it a location where the municipality, because it's a state agency, where the municipality allows this type of use? And are the applicants appropriate applicants? Is their money clean? Are they of good standing? Have they not had any problems in the past? And if the answers to all of those questions are yes, then we grant them a liquor license. So he said, I'm going to pass legislation to change that. And he came up with this concept of the 500-foot law, which basically says if there are 3 or more existing establishments within a 500-foot radius of where you want to open, the area is deemed overly congested, and the liquor authority shall deny the application unless, in consultation with the town where the population is 20,000 or more, or the community board, in the case of New York City, the liquor authority decides it's in the public interest. Now, it didn't define what the public interest is. And his original draft basically had a veto for the community board. Unless the community board approved it, that did not pass the state legislature. Years later, and then I'll go into it a little bit more. Years later, I had debated with him, and I said, we have 3 liquor licenses in one building. At that time, I said the Time Warner building.
Yeah.
We have Restaurant and Row. How silly is this concept that is overly congested because there are 3 in a 500-foot radius? Why wasn't, at least Manhattan exempted? And he said, because nobody asked.
There was no hospitality alliance
back then.
Yeah.
So what happened? The law was passed, went to effect November 1992. 93.
Yeah.
All right. For the next 7 years, the Liquor Authority, like most government agencies, gave it short shrift because no government agency likes to have their power be limited by the legislature or anybody else. In 2000, 7 years into the law, there was a controversial case in Soho. And the Liquor Authority, it was a 500-foot case. The Liquor Authority approved it. There were groups in Soho who sued. They took the Liquor Authority to court. And the judge there said, I don't know what the 500-foot law public interest means, but I know that the reasons that the Liquor Authority gave in their approval letter, above the objection of the community groups, above the objection after consultation with the community board, was new jobs and taxes. And she goes, the legislature had to mean something other than that because every new business brings jobs and taxes. And this is a law that limits the number of new businesses that are going to open. So she reversed the Liquor Authority and sent it back for them for further consideration. A better analysis of what's in the public interest. And for the next couple of years, all of us practitioners and the Liquor Authority were flailing around about what does that mean? And we would go to the Liquor Authority if we couldn't come, and say, it's in the public interest because there is no macrobiotic restaurant in this neighborhood. And this is a macrobiotic restaurant. Things like that. It got silly because after a while, there was nothing in New York City that doesn't exist, within a cab ride away. Yeah. So what does in the public interest mean? So what happened around that time is the Liquor Authority also started losing a lot of personnel. We discussed that. So you have this other law now with these more considerations with less people. And you have this court case, which they didn't appeal. So it's not an appellate decision. It's one judge, as we're learning in the Trump administration, one judge doesn't necessarily make law. And so basically what they decided was, well, you got to go to the community board anyway, because the law requires that. And if it's a 500-foot case and you can come to an agreement with the community board about your method of operation, we'll deem it in the public interest and you'll get approved the licensing division can approve this application. But if you can't come to an agreement with the community board and they recommend denial of a 500-foot case, well, then your application is going to be slowed down. You're going to have to go to the full board for a final determination. And you, the applicant, are going to have to show us why this is in the public interest, why we should overrule the community board, which we have the authority to do. So that created a major imbalance. And 20 some odd years later, we're still dealing with that imbalance because many community boards who were anti-alcohol, who were anti-nightlife, took that as a way to demand things that even the liquor law doesn't give the state liquor authority to do. Reduce hours of operation in New York City, for example. New York City is a 4 a.m. by law liquor license location. People have forgotten that because it's been 20 some odd years now where we're negotiating hours of operation with the community board. Things like no dancing, no DJ, no live music, things that are not listed in the ABC law and the alcohol law as factors, even under the 500-foot law, became by default factors through the community board process and the slowing down of your application. So yes, people will voluntarily, with a gun to their head, agree to these things. But the reality is that 500-foot law has dramatically changed, the dynamic. And as your committee recommended, it should be eliminated because it's a vestige of an old idea that alcohol and nightlife and bars are bad.
And just to jump in on that, I just want to underscore because I can't emphasize it enough. People talk, I hear, reporters talk to me about this. People talk frequently about sort of like the death of nightlife in New York City, or is New York City not the nightlife town that it used to be? How come there are so few establishments open till 4 a.m. these days? What happened to the music scene in New York City? Why did it move out of Manhattan? Why are there so few places with live music these days in New York? And people come up with lots of different reasons, but the unsexy, but in the trenches, very true reason that contributes significantly to that is exactly what you just heard. And I can second it because I live in those trenches and I bring liquor license applications to community boards every month. You cannot get approved for a liquor license, or at least supported by the community board for a liquor license in most of Manhattan, most of Brooklyn, if you want to be open till 4 a.m. or have live music or, bands from time to time. They will essentially laugh you out of the room. And because of the way that the 500-foot law has become interpreted, that immediately puts a whole cloud on your liquor license application. It has all these immediate effects. You can't commit to your lease anymore. You can't start building out your restaurant. You have to wait to see what the full liquor board is going to say about that, all of which adds months and months. In many cases, you can't get the temp that we got passed. You can't get a temp. So in facing all of that, what most businesses do is if they can't get the support of the community board, they just basically walk away from the space. And so that really has been a contributing factor. And it's something we've got to do something about.
It's really limiting nightlife. It's limiting live music. Live music is a shade of what of its former self in my own time of practice. Yeah, and it's for this reason. I'll tell you a true anecdotal funny story. So I happened to be going to Community Board 3 in Manhattan the night that there was during that day. That day, New York Times had a story that CBGB's was closing down. Everybody, famous place,
Ramones and tons of music came out of there.
It's time it had passed. Its time had come and it was closing down. So I had a case that night in front of CB3, which is where CBGB is. So it was a good client. I said, let's have a little fun here. He said, okay. So when I got up to make my presentation, I said, this is an application for a new bar, open till 4 o'clock in the morning. Playing a type of music that nobody here in the committee, would listen to, attracting a group of people that none of the people here on the committee will feel comfortable around. Do you see any problems with that? And that was the reaction. There was laughter in the room. I said, well, it's not the case. That's not what my application is, because they're looking through their papers. There's a restaurant book.
What's going on?
I said, but that's what CBGB was. And
interesting.
There was no way I could come into your community board today and get the new CBGBs approved.
You'd be laughed out.
Literally laughed out of the room.
So there's another example. 500-foot law is basically limiting nightlife. It's basically making small business owners completely have to change what their concept is, shutting earlier, not allowing live music, not having DJs, and all these other stipulations, just with the hope that if they agree to that, okay, the state liquor authority will issue that license. So what do you do? I guess tips. So someone wants to open up a bar, a nightclub, a restaurant in one of these neighborhoods where the community board can be really challenging. What do you say to them just to get them to understand the reality?
Well, the first thing we do is we say, if you want, we're not anti-bar in our firm.
Sure.
And if you want a 4 a.m. bar, you need to find a place that's currently a 4 a.m. bar.
Okay.
Because the chance of you taking over a restaurant that was a beloved neighborhood restaurant that closed at midnight and turning into getting approved for a 4 a.m. bar, is slim to none.
Mm-hmm. Or taking over a place that used to be a dry cleaners and turning it into a bar is even slimmer.
Some places even a restaurant.
Than none.
Try taking over, in the Lower East Side, with that group there who fights every new liquor license application. Try taking over, a bodega that went out of business and putting in a restaurant with beer and wine. They'll oppose you.
Right. Beyond that, you really need to protect yourself in the lease. Mm-hmm. We emphasize that over and over again with clients, potential clients, is that you can't sign your lease and have yourself fully committed to the space until after you've gone through the community board process. The good news is that the community board process is first in the whole sequence of events of getting a liquor license. Most community boards their process is over in about 30 to 45 days.
And most are reasonable.
And most are reasonable. But I tell clients that, predicting what a community board is going to do is a little bit like predicting the weather. And I'm the meteorologist. I'm educated on it. I can give you some good predictions, some sound advice. But at the end of the day, we don't really know what's going to happen at a community board meeting. So, don't sign your lease. Or if you do sign your lease, make sure it has a community board contingency clause in there that lets you out. I can't tell you how many people I meet on a regular basis, intakes in our office, where they didn't get that advice initially and they have fully committed to a lease. They've put their security deposit down. They've personally guaranteed the rent. Maybe even they've started to build and put construction money in, only to then have a community board meeting where things go really south on them and they're in a panic, rightfully so, because now they're committed to this space and they have this community board that's against them, where they never understood the importance of that or what kind of implications that has for their business.
Or if you're buying a business, and where over the decades I've been doing this, it ebbs and flows about buying businesses. Right after COVID, nobody was buying an existing business because there were a couple of thousand at least.
Yeah, vacant,
fully built out places with landlords who were offering rent a third less than what the guy who just turn the keys back. We're back into the era now where people, the best way to get in is to buy an existing licensed space. So the other thing is we talk about, contingencies in that deal. Yeah. Don't close the deal and give the seller a bunch of money until you've been through the community board, until your temporary is approved by the liquor authority. Yeah. So there are tips.
Yeah. Quickly, last thing is, that I tell people is, after you've done all that stuff and you go to the community board meeting, when you're there and you are negotiating with them, you got to be really honest with yourself about whether you can actually live by the things that you're negotiating. A lot of people in sort of the heat of the moment in the community board meeting, they just want to come out with a win. Yeah. But sometimes coming out with a win means sacrificing your concept, and you've got to be true to your concept. If you want to have a swanky cocktail bar that's open till 3 a.m., then that's what you want. That's what I want you to have. And don't promise the community board that you're going to be a restaurant.
Yeah. And 99% of the times where there is conflict, it's not personal. Yeah. It's, we don't want this type of business here. And if that's what you need, if you're a 4 a.m. sports bar and that's your business, you need to be a 4 a.m. sports bar, not a 1 a.m. cocktail lounge.
Yeah. But we need to even, with that all said though, and yes, of course, community input is important. And even before the 500-foot law, community input is part of the process, even for applications that are not under the 500-foot law. Community board still gets their say. Liquor authority takes it seriously. That's important, but we do need to help re-level the playing field, because right now with 500-foot law cases, the community boards really have too much of an advantage.
Well, I think it's twofold. I mean, I know one, there's term limits now for community board members. I'm on a community board, so I also see it, from that perspective as well.
Very reasonable one, by the way.
Yes, and what part of it is, I think. The members of the board, you want people that are going to have all different perspectives. Community boards do a lot more than just, liquor license review and everything. But what I've also seen is just having diverse voices appointed to community boards on whatever the issue is. Liquor license, schools,
zoning,
land use
parks,
is so important, because one voice in a liquor license case can really change the whole dynamic of the conversation. So I'd love to see.
It's particularly important for community boards, because the reality of the way community boards work, and I've been dealing with it for decades, to the point where I couldn't do it anymore, so Max now does it, is that people who are opposed to something will show up and come to their community board. People in the neighborhood who are not opposed, who have no problem, the 4 28-year-old girls who are sharing a one-bedroom apartment, who are thrilled to have a new bar open downstairs, they're not taking a night out from their life to come to the community board or Zoom in now and say, oh, this is a great idea. We would love it. So they're only hearing from the no's.
Yes.
And you need different voices on the board to understand that we're only hearing from the people who are opposed.
Yep. No, and you need everybody's voice that's going to come out. I mean, listen, I keep saying we need more small business owners from restaurants, bars, but all types of small business represented on the board. But it's a lot, you have
it's a lot
full
of time.
Board, which can be all night, and then you're on 2 committees. So at least 3 nights out of your month, if not more, are taken up by it. And some of the stuff you may be interested in, other stuff you may not. But it is an important civic duty, and I think we need to get more small business owners, people that work in businesses, to get out and share their voice and be part of this process.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, community boards, by and large, good people on all community boards. Shout out to
Tremendous amount of
CB7,
volunteer-
great community
CB7
board.
Tremendous amount of volunteer effort. I
Volunteerism.
totally respect it.
Yeah.
But, especially the ones who sit on liquor license committees, there tend to be some entrenched folks on there who are not necessarily representative of the whole community. One concern that frequently arises is we'll routinely have liquor license applications where we go to the community board after conducting outreach to all the people who live nearby, petitioning, et cetera, and there is nobody who showed up to oppose the application. Nobody's there to oppose it. And nevertheless, there'll be people who sit on the community board who just say, well, I don't like the sound of that, and so I'm going to vote against it. And the concern is, well, whose interests are you really representing here? Because nobody in the neighborhood, your constituents, are here to oppose you. So we do need a greater diversity of voices.
Yeah.
Hopefully the term limits law, which is now finally starting to take into effect, will do some of that. Obviously, it depends a lot on who the borough president is, because the borough president appoints many of the community board members. And so we want to see more diversity.
And it's hard to get business people to devote that amount of time. They're busy running their business.
So if we can get additional voices on community boards, that's absolutely a plus. But what about regulatory reform? Is there any changes in the law?
We need, let's talk about dancing for a minute. Dancing and live music. We started that conversation. This is something that the first trade association I organized after I left Consumer Affairs was the Cabaret Association. The Cabaret Association morphed, and that was licensed dance clubs. That morphed into the New York Nightlife Association, which was all late night places, bars and what have you, which ultimately morphed into the New York City Hospitality Alliance. The issue of ending the regulation of dancing in the city of New York and live music has been a battle that I've been involved with for 35 going on 40 years now. And we've had major victories, major victories. There were periods of time where under Giuliani, where I was defending bars with the accusation where people were rhythmically moving to the jukebox, and they were giving them violations for being an unlicensed, dance club, cabaret, what they called back then. We got the cabaret law repealed. And we said, a lot of people didn't want to hear, it's great that the cabaret law is repealed. It's an old law. It's racist. There's no reason for it, but it's not going to allow dancing in one more place than it did before. And people said, why? And we said, because of the zoning laws. Ultimately, everybody realized you and I were right, Andrew, and it's the zoning laws which were inhibiting where dancing can take place. So recently we got the zoning laws dramatically liberalized. So we're now, every small bar, in the city of New York, with a capacity under, I believe it's 200, can have dancing, if they choose. But we warned that it's a great victory, but nevertheless, the Liquor Authority. And you have hundreds and hundreds of places that opened over the years where dancing was not allowed. And so they stipulated in their community board, no dancing. But that was like ice in the winter. They also say, you might as well say no gambling, everything,
of course.
No drugs in my place. It all was not allowed. It was all illegal. So they stipulated to that. But now that we have these changes in the law, the city municipality has basically said, we've turned the page on this ancient, prejudice against people dancing inside or against live music. We have plenty of laws to govern all of that. We have sound codes. We have safety codes, fire. So we don't care if people are dancing inside. Matter of fact, we think it's a good thing.
Sure.
And we don't care if it's live music or not. Yet, the Liquor Authority, through the community boards in the way we've discussed in the 5-foot law, does care. And we've got to really deal with that next. That is the last battle in the war to deregulate dancing and to deregulate how people listen to music in the city of New York.
Yeah, and it's really one that, it's really one that requires, respect for local autonomy and local democracy. I mean, here in New York, through a conversation with all local stakeholders, elected officials, the people who we've elected to office, and through what's now been a very long conversation, have agreed that dancing, live music, these are things that we want to see flourish. And it's, it feeds into a broader issue that we're seeing, a broader dynamic that we're seeing in a few different areas, including outdoor dining, where you have some folks who also had their chance to participate in the conversation and did, ultimately didn't get exactly what they wanted out of that conversation, out of that debate, using their role in the liquor license process, the state liquor license process, to try to basically
bootstrap,
pull a victory and overrule what's going on in New York City. And it's just not fair. We should not be using the state liquor license process to basically overrule New York City laws on dancing, outdoor dining, live music. We should have respect for those things. And by the way, there's nothing specific anywhere in the state law that gives specifically community boards and the liquor authority the right to regulate those things. I know all the arguments. I've seen all of the references to the vague portions of the statute that people who are on the other side talk about in this area. All of it, we don't have time to get into it. All of it is nonsense. Yeah. The liquor authority does not have the right to regulate these things, and it's time that we started getting that message out there.
And as Max said in the beginning, when he talked about the history of alcohol regulation, that's what they're there to do. They're there to regulate alcohol, consumption and service, distribution, production of alcohol. Whether people get up and dance on a Friday night or not, it has nothing to do with the raison d'etre of the liquor authority.
Yeah.
If they hear music from played by a DJ or live, it's nothing to do with that, what their purpose is.
Yeah, we need to just get that last part changed. But it's just fascinating to me how when you think of music and dance, these things that are just like so essential to the human experience. And when you think about the greatest music, we mentioned CBGBs and the Ramones, you think about Bob Dylan, and you just think of all these genres of art and music come out of restaurants, come out of bars.
Hip-hop started
in
here.
New York
Salsa
City.
started here. So much started here.
And these complicated regulations are the ones that are basically stifling it. And it just takes so much organizing, so much advocacy. But over time, we can make these changes. And this sounds like a big change, basically getting dancing and live music completely out of liquor regulation. As long as the fire code and the building code and the sound code are all enforced and address it, who cares?
Right. And as far as the liquor authority is concerned, if you apply to be a restaurant, there's food requirements, there's a kitchen requirement, it must be open at all times. As long as you're satisfying your restaurant requirements, who cares if on Saturday night some tables are pushed aside and people are dancing while they're having their late night dinner?
All right. So real quick on outdoor dining. So we've talked about it a lot. Before the pandemic, there was 12 to 1,400 licensed sidewalk cafes across the 5 boroughs. Vast majority of them located south of 96th Street in Manhattan. During the pandemic, we advocated successfully, got the open restaurants program. There was about 13,000 restaurants across the 5 boroughs. All types of neighborhoods, all types of restaurants offering outdoor dining in the sidewalk and the roadway. A lot of advocacy, a lot of different compromise amongst different stakeholders created this new Dining Out NYC program. Some aspects of the program are better than the pre-pandemic program. Many new challenges exist. So with all that teed up, if we want to build upon the success of the new program, address the shortcomings and the problems, what reforms should the mayor's office and the city council be looking at to make outdoor dining more inclusive, less bureaucracy, less cost, and really fulfill the dream and the desire that our lawmakers and our industry and people who love alfresco dining were saying during the program?
You got the guy. You got the guy here who wrote the book on outdoor dining, so he'll let him preach.
No pressure. What's the answer?
Major new laws are a subject of compromise, and that's generally a good thing. But sometimes there are too many cooks and too many compromises, and that's what happened here with the outdoor dining law and the rules that came after it. And we're seeing, the results of that now. The number of businesses, the number of restaurants that applied for outdoor dining can only be considered extremely disappointing and a failure. It's not what we didn't expect. We expected thousands more to apply, and the reasons why they're telling us they did not apply are the reasons is the basis of the reforms that are necessary. One, roadway dining does not work unless it's all year round. The economics of it just doesn't work. The design requirements that they put in are beautiful, but they're not cheap. They're expensive, and to break that down and put it back up every year and store it somewhere is just doesn't work. And the design requirements are such that you can't just put up, a piece of wood crap anymore like you may have done during COVID, thinking it was only about for a few months because it doesn't meet the design requirements. So you can't put up something cheap. You have to put up something expensive, and to take it down and store it doesn't work. So if a few less parked cars is a positive, and I think it is, then there needs to be an all year round option for roadway dining. Maybe, there's an extra step in the approval process. Maybe not every location is appropriate for it, but that's number one. Number two is the clearances that DOT basically snuck in after the law was passed need to be reformed. We need to go back to the old clearances, how it was measured, the amount of sidewalk space. They came up with something very complicated, very difficult. Existing businesses that had cafes with no problem for decades are losing seats now. So many businesses didn't bother applying because the number of tables and chairs they can get didn't work. And the way the layout doesn't work, zigzagging in and out because of clearance from every street sign. It's silly. So we need to radically transform and go back to clearances that worked for 40 years before DOT took it over. And that's and third and not least is the cost. The fees are still too high. They're less than they were, but they're still too high, especially in the outer boroughs for a lot of small businesses. Many areas of Manhattan is still too expensive. It's short-sighted for the city to worry about how much fees they're getting because they're losing thousands of restaurants that aren't paying them anything because they didn't apply. And they're losing all the taxes and the jobs that go along with those thousands of restaurants that are not doing outdoor dining. If you lower the fees dramatically and do these other reforms, the number of places you get, the city bucket,
it's generating even
maybe
more.
in a different bucket, but they'll get more money than by having the current fees.
And it's even with the sidewalk cafes, like we were saying, putting a nice winter vestibule up on the sidewalk during the cooler months so they can still be utilized, keeps
Correct.
the jobs,
Yeah,
they're paying payroll
they're paying
tax,
rent year
they're paying
round.
sales
You're paying rent to the city
tax.
year round
Absolutely.
anyway, so why not?
Yeah.
So there are some, so if you do those things, we also learned that there are a lot of immigrant, non-English speaking businesses that found the online only application process with the uploading and the downloading too cumbersome and too overwhelming, and they didn't apply. Not being able to save your work and stuff like that. All that modernization is great. Being able to apply online is great. Not having to sit in a government office and wait your turn like a motor vehicle is great. But for a lot of small businesses, they need that option. Yeah. They need the option of bringing in their voluminous paperwork, bringing it to a person, having them reviewing it, saying, this is okay, stamped, approved, or stamp received, or no, you're missing this and you're missing that, come back.
I just want to, I know we're short on time here, but, just a PSA that I know the both of you know, but I tell everyone who will listen is to remember that if you do get an outdoor dining license, because to bring it back to liquor, that doesn't mean that you can have alcohol in your outdoor dining. It's the city of New York that regulates outdoor dining, but it's the state of New York Liquor Authority that regulates alcohol, and everybody has to take an additional step once they've gotten their outdoor dining license to legalize alcohol there. You and I, Andrew, we've testified in front of the Liquor Authority. They know where we stand on that. We think there are ways that could have made the mechanism for getting that alcohol approval in the outdoor dining a little more seamless, a little less cumbersome, a little less burdensome. It is what it is at the moment, but we don't want anyone to forget that. Just because you have an outdoor dining license doesn't mean you can have alcohol there.
And just because for decades you had alcohol in your outdoor dining, legal outdoor dining under the new law, doesn't mean you don't have to reapply to the Liquor Authority, just as you had to reapply to the city.
Oh, all right. I need a
drink.
This is not even as a sales pitch, but this is what I just tell people all the time is this stuff is complicated. Your liquor license, your outdoor dining, it is all going to have so many ramifications for the success of your business. And if you have to spend more money up front, and I know money can be tough to come by, but especially when you're trying to open, just work with people like you or someone that can explain the ins and outs, because, what is an innocent mistake can end up having huge ramifications of whether you'll even be able to open your doors and how long you will succeed if you do get them open.
It's not just filling out papers. I wish it was that simple.
Yeah. So thank you. I'm sure later today or tomorrow we'll kind of continue a similar conversation, but we'll have to have you back another time to keep talking.
Thanks for doing this. This is great.
Yeah,
Good to be here. Thanks for having
it's
us.
a
This
good-
type of education for the public is wonderful. It's another great thing that the Hospitality Alliance does.
Fantastic. Hospitality and Politics, New York City Hospitality Alliance. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks
Andrew.
for having us, man.